Hi everyone, my name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. I also have a podcast where each week I cover another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D. Hi everyone and welcome. Today we're going to go over another 3D modeling tool called Lathe while 3D modeling a Wacom pen. So I thought this would be a great way to practice. It's a lot of fun. So let's jump into Cinema 4D and get started. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D. If you don't already have your project settings open, hit Control D for PC or Command D for Mac. Under the scale settings here, make sure you have millimeter selected. And in our preferences, edit preferences, make sure that we also have our units matching as millimeters. We are going to be using the spline pen today. So something that you may want to do to make your spline a little bit easier to see is to increase this thickness, spline thickness. By default, mine and everyone's is set to 1. I increased this to 3, so that's a little bit easier for you to see as you're following along. If you still want to be able to see a little bit easier, if you go into your viewport settings, under scheme colors, you'll see you have these colors here, spline start and spline end. You can change these colors to your liking to make it easier for you to see your splines. Now the next thing we need to do is import a reference. We'll need to create a plane, so we'll select our plane over here. I'm going to make it in the -z direction, and I'll change our width to be 160 millimeters and our height to be 160 millimeters. Now with that done, we can use this as a reference and add a texture to it. I'm going to use the C hotkey in order to make this editable, or you can hit this button down here in order to do so. I click the middle mouse button again to go into the front view. You can also click it to go into all 4 views to select one with the middle mouse button. So right now I'm selecting this one. I'll turn on Enable Axis. You can also do this with the L key. That's the hotkey for it. And we want to snap the axis of this to the base here. So I'm going to enable our snap settings, and I'm going to make sure to have edge selected. Now the interesting thing about this tool is it has so many different options in here. So if you are interested in learning any more of these, you can on the other episode I made just on the snap settings, and I'll leave a link to that below. Now that we have our axis at the bottom, we want to move this upwards to the center, to where our origin is. So in order to do that, I now want to snap this to our grid. I'm going to turn off Enable Axis. I'll move this up. And here we are. We can see we are snapping to the grid point. It says it right there. So we'll let that go. Now we have our reference plane in position so that we can add a reference to our plane. We will click the Material Manager icon up here, and whether if you're working in Redshift, Octane, or anything else, the process is very similar. I'm going to create a Redshift standard material. This is going to be our pen reference. Now with our pen reference done, we'll go ahead and click on this, and I need to drag and drop my reference over into here. I'll close out of that. I'll connect this texture to our base color, and now we can see that the texture is appearing on here. We need to drag and drop it to our plane. Now we see the texture appearing on our plane. I'm going to move this plane back just a little bit so that we can see our spline a little bit easier when I go back into the front view. Now we can't see our texture here, so we'll need to change our display to either quick shading or garage shading. You'll notice that the resolution on my image is decent, but if you find that yours is looking pixelated, you can fix that in your preferences, edit preferences, go into your viewport display, or rather your viewport hardware, excuse me. Go into your viewport hardware. The default resolution you can choose, it's usually actually 256 by default, but I increased mine. And this does take up more memory, so if you want to lower this down, you can. I have mine at a higher amount just so that's easier for me to trace this. That's where you can adjust that there. Now, something about our plane is the texture on it doesn't look perfectly centered, so we need to fix that. I'll click on my material tag right here, and I'll offset the U just a little bit. 1% is perfect. Now this is pretty centered. It's a good reference. We're going to work with this now. So I don't want to accidentally click on my plane while I'm working on it, so I'm actually going to create a new layer and call this reference. I'll drag and drop my plane to the reference. You can see it has the layer color applied. And now we can lock it in place. We can go over to our spline pen tool. I have another episode where I cover the spline pen if you're interested in checking that out. Again, I'll leave a link to it below. All the tools that I'm going over that are covered in another episode, I'll actually be leaving in the description below. So just a heads up on that. That's where you can find all that info. So what we'll do is we'll click right here. We'll just begin tracing this pen. Now we are 3D modeling this. As a reference, I actually want this part here to be a little bit curved, so I'll click and then drag my mouse. We are 3D modeling this for animation purposes, so we don't need to necessarily have everything in separate parts as they would be when being manufactured. We can just hint at it through creating part lines in this model, as I'm doing here. And it looks like my pen's actually a little bit different than the image's pen here. Maybe this is a slightly different version, but I think what I'll do is you can trace this however you want. I'm going to give it a little bit of an indent there because that's what it looks like when I'm looking at this in real life. I'm going to turn off the snap for a little bit because I think it's throwing off my pen tool. And I'll click and drag here to create this slight curve that you can see is on the pen. We have yet another part line here. So I'll go ahead and just make that slight little divot here, just to hint at the fact that there is a part line here. And then we're here at the end. Looks like there's another very, very small divot there, so I'll go ahead like this. And this image isn't an exact orthographic view, so you can see we're actually getting some perspective here with this being rounded, but since we actually need this to be flat. In an orthographic view, you wouldn't see this ellipse here. So what you actually have is a very, very, very slight pivot. I mean, a very, very slight bevel. So if I just click here, and then we have a very minute small bevel here. This looks good to me. I want to snap to the center of the grid again. So I'm just going to go right here. We can add this part of the pen later, but this is a very good starting point. So this is a good place to be. Let's hold a click on here and you'll see we have our lathe option. We need to, first of all, name our spline pen base, because that's the base shape of our pen. Lathe pen base. Now we drop our spline within the hierarchy of the pen, and voila! We have a pretty nice looking Wacom pen model. That's hard for me to say. I've been using Wacom pens for I don't know how many years, and it's the one thing that's really hard for me to say still. But let's go ahead into our display settings and turn on our lines so that we can actually see the lines of our mesh. We have several settings within our lathe tool. So let's talk about them a little bit and what's happening here. I'm going to click the middle mouse button to come out of here, and I'm going to click the middle mouse button again to come into here. Now we have this option called angle. Angle lets you choose what number of degrees this is being rotated around. So that's pretty interesting. It makes sense for our pen to be at 360 degrees. You can also enter this in manually. You can choose the number of subdivisions. Now, the number of subdivisions are how many times this is being subdivided as it wraps around. So if I decrease this, you can see it's becoming more and more blocky, less and less detailed. You can go all the way down to 3. This is a very funny triangle looking shaped pen. Or we could increase this up to here. So it's up to you what settings you use. 36 seems pretty reasonable for the shape of this. Something that you may notice is that we didn't perfectly line up this point here, so we can still do that. I'm going to go into the top view, and I have my snap settings on still, so I'm going to snap this. And now that is completely closed on the top. We'll also check the bottom to make sure it is closed on the bottom. The bottom looks good to me. All good signs. So here we are ready to move on. That's your angle. Those are your subdivisions. Your next option is isoparms. So let's change our display to show isoparms. The hotkey for that is NI. Isoparms are just another way to view your model. They focus more on showing the curvature than showing your actual topology. So what you see here is not a representation of your topology. It's just a preview of the model itself. If you increase your number of isoparms, you'll just have more of these defining the curvature of the model. And they tend to put them where there's the most detail. So that's what isoparms are. Movement is an interesting one. I'm going to change this back to concentrating lines without the isoparms, just wireframe, because I find it helpful to see the actual topology. Maybe if you have a very dense mesh, it makes sense to change it to just show the isoparms to simplify your model a little bit. But I like to see the actual pieces making up the model usually without the isoparms on the model. So here we have movement. This is an interesting one. So think of, actually this would be great for 3D modeling something like a screw, because what it's doing is, if we use movement, it's almost more like our sweep is being wrapped around a helix instead of a perfect turned shape. It's going around in almost more of a helix. So you could even increase this angle more, come more twisted, and you can imagine how this would actually be a useful way to 3D model something like a screw or some hardware or something like that. I'm going to change this back to 360. In this case, we don't need this movement applied, so I'll take that back to 0. Scaling is actually another interesting one. So you can adjust what the scale is. If I decrease this, you can see that our scale starts off at 100% and then it decreases as it wraps around. So this determines what the scale is at the end of the angle. In our situation, we want to keep the scale the same at the beginning and the end. If you'd like to make some kind of abstract, cool-looking sculpture, this would be a great option for that. I'm going to turn the scale option back up to 100%. Reverse normals, so I have another episode explaining what normals are, why they matter, and how to fix them. But when you're also using a generator, you also have to think a little bit about normals. If you have a spline here like ours that is open and not closed at the end, it could interpret your normals of your mesh on both sides, which your normals determine what's the exterior of the polygon and what's the interior. And that's used for 3D modeling calculations. It's used for rendering calculations. So it's really important to have that correct. You need it to be correct in order to 3D print, so that the 3D printer can know what side of the mesh is the inside and what side is the outside in order to calculate volume. So that's getting into a lot of nerdy stuff there. If you're interested in learning that nerdy stuff, I have another video on it. But just briefly, that's what reverse normals is for. If your normals aren't correct on your mesh, if you were to make this editable, which I'll do, I'll right click on this and say current state to object. You'll see we have this new object here. If I click on the polygons, you can see that this is actually correct. We have orange polygons. If it were incorrect, they would be purple because the inside of a polygon is supposed to be purple. So it's just making sure that outside is the outside and the inside is the inside and nothing swapped around. Since this is correct, we don't need to reverse the normals, but you could. So we've gone over the object settings for the lathe tool. Let's talk about caps. We have this other tab here called caps in here. Now these settings aren't really affecting our Wacom pen very much right now because our spline is open that we have placed within the lathe. So what I'm going to do is start a new project. Just to show you how this works, let's go into our spline shapes here. I'm going to add in a star because I think this would be fun to add the lathe too. Let's add in a lathe here. Let's place the star within the lathe. Let's do something fun with this. Let's increase the angle quite a bit. Add in some more subdivisions to make it nice and smooth, and adjust the movement because we can and it's fun. Now you'll see we have these two parts at the end. Those are your caps. We have a start cap and an end cap. From this angle, you can actually see both of them at the same time. Let's go into our caps tab. We have a start. If I turn that off, you can see it's gone. If I turn off the end cap, it is gone. Let's turn these back on. Let's turn on our lines so that we can see our geometry here. You can have your tessellation of your end caps be an n-gon. Right now we have an n-gon on both end caps. We can choose to have triangles. You can choose to have quadrangles. Combination of quads and triangles right there. We could have Lathe and reduce the density or increase the density. So Lathe tries to adjust your mesh to make it easier for deformations usually. I think the best one of all of these is regular grid. And the reason why I like regular grid is because I actually think this one's the best one for if you're deforming this in any sense. And you can have an even grid pattern. You can even turn on quad dominant if you want. You can adjust the size of the grid here, which I think is very helpful. Let's talk about some more of these caps options. You can choose to bevel these with the same settings, both the start and end cap, or you could create a separate controls for both of them. When I click this button, you can see this changed from start and end. If I click this, now we have start separate from the end, and we can control them separately. So it's up to you if you want to control them as one or as separate entities. I'm going to turn that off and just affect both of them. You have these options here. Rounding, if we increase the size, it will round these sections here. Add some nice rounding to them. You can adjust the subdivisions on the bevel or decrease them. You can adjust the tension. You can see the tension more from the side. And increasing the subdivisions makes it easier to see. This is negative 100% tension. This is 100% tension. You can choose to have the bevels act as extrusions. And then you can adjust the offset here. So you have different ways of controlling these rounding options. You can also work with a solid. A solid is useful for if you drop this within a subdivision surface. You can see once you drop that into a subdivision surface, it's much more rounded. I'm going to decrease the subdivisions because we don't need a lot of subdivisions when actually in solid mode. You can see this is already becoming beveled. There's different ways you can do it. I'm going to turn off the subdivision surface. I'll turn on step. Step is a lot of fun, and it's exactly what it sounds like it would be. Your number of subdivisions will affect your number of steps here. So that is another way to bevel these. And you have another option called spline. Now this one usually looks better with more subdivisions, but you can actually manually adjust the shape of your bevel in here by controlling and clicking and creating new points, and then you can move them and adjust them however you'd like, and that will be the profile of your bevel. So you can make something custom in here. You can even load a preset if you'd like. let's say we think this is really beautiful and we click on that. We could go ahead and load that in there, and now we have that applied. So there's various options. You have the option to use absolute value, and then you can select a max shape height in here. You could also choose to bevel the outside. I'm going to change this back to a normal round shape to show this. You can see when I click bevel outside, everything expands to compensate for that bevel. If you turn this off, you have this option for avoid self-intersections and break Phong rounding. Avoid self-intersections will protect your model from having intersections and avoid any kind of errors that could go on with your bevels, basically. So I think it's good to always keep that on. You can turn on break Phong rounding. That is the shading that is related to the Phong tag that it is talking about. I have another episode where I go in depth over what Phong shading is. So I'm not going to cover that in depth here today, but if you're interested in learning that, I'll leave a link to that in the description. Those are all your caps options. So this was fun to show you a little bit of the difference between the settings between the closed splines and open splines. There's this last option here called selections. So let's create some materials. Just as an example, I'm going to create a few standard materials. Let's make each one a different color for fun. This one can be green. This one can be yellow, bright yellow. And this one can be pink. To be a little bit more of a reddish pink. Okay, so we have these materials, and this works for any kind of renderer. So if you're working in Octane or something else, no worries. The process is the same for your rendering system. Now, with all of these, what I want to show you again is our selections here. So you can create polygon selections and edge selections for your lathe generator object. Even generators can have polygon and edge selections while you're 3D modeling. If we want to have these present, all we need to do is check these boxes besides these options here. I'll check this one, this one, this one, and you'll see these triangle icons are showing up. These are representing our selections, and we can use these selections for modeling and texturing. I'm going to turn on now the polygon options: end bevel, start bevel, end cap, start cap, shell. You'll see the polygon selections are filled triangles and the edge selections are not. Let's add these colors in here. What if we want to control where all these colors are going? Let's look at this one. This one is S. We could look at our lathe object. What is S? S is the shell. We could have the shell be pink. So S is shell, so we change our selection to the letter S, and that will tell it to be pink. The green is still overriding that, so let's go ahead and control where the other selections are going. We have C1 as the start cap, so let's make the yellow C1. And let's make the green C2. Okay, now that we've adjusted all of these, you'll see these materials are in a hierarchy. So if you have one in front, it overrides the other ones before it, kind of covers them up. So once we added in all of our selections to each one of these, you can see the different parts of the model that are being affected. And we can control these colors by our selections here within the lathe. This has a Fong tag, so it has a Fong tab here as well. You can learn about the Fong settings in another tutorial I have. But that's all of the settings for the lathe object. The other settings come with every other tool. You have your coordinates here. You have your name layer, viewport visibility, and whether or not if the lathe is enabled here. All these settings are here. Your display color is and what it's set to. Ours is set to material. Those are all the settings for the lathe. Now, quickly, I'd like to go ahead and add in this part here and add in this part here. I'm going to I moved this over because I also want to show you that there's a button here. And in the next episode, so this is actually going to have a couple parts to it. For right now, we're talking about the lathe tool. Next week, we're going to go over the thicken tool and how to use that in order to add thickness to this. In the past, we've gone over the mesh thicken tool. Next week, we're going to go over the thicken generator. And we're going to add some thickness to this in order to add this button and make the button look more realistic than if we just didn't make this have actual thickness to it. So we're going to show how to make that realistic button there. And that's why I'd moved this over. I'm going to now move this back. So here we are. I'm back in the front view. I used the middle mouse button for that. We need to add in a capsule. I'm going to close out of the materials for right now. Now that we have a capsule in here, we can adjust the size in our attributes. Our size can be 0.5 because this is our pen tip, which will be fairly small, and we can make the height about 3. And now that we've done that, we can move this up. Maybe this is a little bit too small. We'll make it 0.6. Maybe we'll make this 4. So this is looking about right to me. We can rename this pen tip. We need to copy and paste this because now we need pen end, the end of the pen. And I was thinking of recentering this, but I think we can get this pretty close just by eyeballing it here to our reference rather than moving our reference directly behind it in this case. I'm going to increase the radius and the height until they look like they just about match. So this looks like it's matching. So now we have the end of our pen and the tip of our pen. This is looking good. We can go ahead and hide our reference from here in our layers. If you're interested in learning how to add a realistic button to your Wacom pen, we'll go over that next week, as well as how to use the thicken generator. So I really hope you'll join me for that. And thank you so much for taking the time to 3D model with me here on Ambient 3D Animations. If you'd like to learn more 3D modeling tools and tips, please hit like and subscribe so that you'll be notified when the next episode comes out. If you would like to help my YouTube channel further, I'd really appreciate it. A way you can do that is by buying me a coffee on Ko-fi. The link to that is in the description below. And thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you here next week.